The tray hit the floor before she could stop it. Ceramic shattered across polished tile. Glass rolled toward the nearest table. Every head in the restaurant turned, and the silence that followed was worse than the crash itself. Zara pressed her lips together, didn't flinch, didn't apologize to the room. She crouched slowly, carefully, one hand braced against her knee, and began picking up the pieces. Outside, Seoul rain tapped against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Hanul Fusion, the kind of restaurant where the lighting was soft on purpose and the menu had no prices, the kind of place that made working women invisible. She had been invisible here for 4 months. That had been the plan. Leave it. The manager, Park, appeared beside her with a towel already in hand and irritation already on his face. "Hey, table 7 is asking for you." Zara straightened, smoothed her apron, and turned. That was when she saw him. He was standing at the entrance, shaking rain from his coat. Dark wool, perfectly cut. A man built for rooms that adjusted around him. 2 assistants flanked him. A third was already pulling out a chair. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at his phone, scrolling with the quiet authority of someone who had never once waited for anything. Min-jae. Her chest locked. Flash. A wedding ring slipping onto her finger, gold against dark skin, his thumb pressing it down gently like a promise. Flash. Divorce papers on a glass table, her signature already dry, his pen still in his hand. Flash. A door closing. No goodbye, just the sound of his shoes on marble, getting quieter until there was nothing left. Back to now. When he looked up from his phone, not at her, at the room, the way powerful men scan spaces without really seeing people. His eyes passed over her the way they passed over the waitstaff, the chairs, the art on the walls. Nothing. He didn't recognize her. Zara exhaled slowly through her nose, picked up her notepad, walked to table 7, which was not his table, and took an order she didn't hear a word of. She managed another 12 minutes. 12 minutes of keeping her back to him, of controlling her breathing, of telling herself that this was fine, that she had survived worse than this, that she could finish her shift and leave, and never come back to this restaurant if she had to. Then his assistant appeared at her elbow. "Excuse me, my director would like still water. Sparkling for his guests. And he says the lighting at table 3 is too warm. Can someone fix it?" Zara nodded once, fetched the water, carried it across the room. She set the still water in front of him without looking at his face. "Thank you," one of his guests said. Min-jae didn't look up. He was mid-sentence to the man across from him. Something about acquisition timelines, market exposure, risk projection. The same voice, measured, precise. Like everything he said had been reviewed before it left his mouth. She was turning to leave when his glass slipped. Not her fault. His own elbow caught it. Water spread across the white tablecloth in a wide, quiet bloom. She reached for the cloth at her waist automatically, began dabbing at the edge. "Don't!" His voice came out flat. Not rude, just final. The voice of a man used to correcting things himself. Just bring another cloth." She went still. He looked up then, really looked. Something shifted in his expression. Not recognition, not quite. More like the ghost of it. The way a word sits on the edge of your tongue and refuses to come forward. He studied her face for 3 full seconds. Then his jaw settled. "If you can't handle pressure," he said, "you shouldn't be here." The table went quiet. Zara looked at him, not with anger, not with tears, with the particular stillness of a woman who had long since decided she would not collapse in public. "I understand," she said. Park materialized from across the room. He had been watching the whole time. He took her by the elbow, gently but firmly, the way you move something that has become inconvenient, and guided her toward the back corridor. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Not unkindly. "Tonight was your last shift." She nodded. In the changing room, she removed her apron, folded it, set it on the shelf with the same care she gave everything she could no longer afford to break. Then she pressed her hand flat against her stomach. From beneath her uniform, unmistakable now, the full round curve of a pregnancy she had been hiding under double aprons and loose blouses for 4 months. 6 months along. She closed her eyes. The baby shifted. Not a kick, something softer, a turn, like the child already knew the room had gone cold and was trying to get comfortable anyway. I know, Zara said quietly. I know. She picked up her bag and walked out into the Seoul rain. If you're already feeling this story, drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. And it only gets heavier from here. The apartment in Itaewon was small enough that the kitchen and the bedroom shared a wall. Zara had learned which floorboards creaked, which window latch stuck, which corner of the room got cold first when the heat cut out at night. She knew this space the way you only know a place you've survived in. Not loved, just endured. She dropped her bag by the door and stood in the center of the room for a moment, not moving. The rain outside had softened to a drizzle. A bus groaned past on the street below. She let the quiet settle around her, then moved to the small table by the window and sat down. The stack of papers there hadn't changed. Medical receipts, prenatal visits, iron supplements, the ultrasound she'd paid for in 2 installments. Below those, in a cluster of rejection emails she'd printed because she liked to read them again and find the exact line where each one turned. Regret to inform you, at this time we are unable. We will keep your application on file. Below those, a handwritten list. Cleaner, receptionist, English tutor, cafe cashier, restaurant waitstaff. Every item crossed out. The last one crossed out tonight. She pulled the list toward her, uncapped a pen, and drew a slow line through it. Then she set the pen down and put both hands flat on the table and looked at the wall. She was not going to cry. She had made that decision 3 months ago, in a hospital corridor, sitting alone with a scan photo and a due date circled in blue ink. Crying was something you did when you still believed someone was coming. No one was coming. That meant the energy went elsewhere. She pushed back from the table, changed out of her uniform, and stood in front of the narrow mirror on the back of the bathroom door. 6 months. The curve was undeniable now. Low and full, the kind of pregnancy that looked like the body had quietly reorganized itself around something more important. She pressed both palms against it and breathed. Just a little longer, she said. We'll be okay. The baby moved, a long, slow roll, like a question being considered. She almost smiled. She turned off the bathroom light and went to bed. Across the city in a penthouse office on the 38th floor, Kang Min-jae was still at his desk at 11:40 at night, which was not unusual. What was unusual was that he hadn't read a single line of the report open in front of him. He kept hearing her voice, calm, quiet, the particular quality of stillness in it, not submission, not defeat. Something older than that, something that sat in the chest and didn't move regardless of what the room did around it. I understand. He reached for his glass, realized it was empty, and set it back down. Pulled the report closer. Read the same paragraph for the 4th time and retained nothing. His assistant, Lee Sun-woo, knocked once and entered. Sun-woo had been with him for 6 years, long enough to read a room without being invited to. He set a folder on the corner of the desk and didn't leave. Min-jae looked up. The waitress, Sun-woo said. Not a question. He had been in the restaurant. He had seen Min-jae's face at the table. The 3-second pause, the slight stiffening of posture, the way he'd spoken too quickly to cover it. Min-jae said nothing. Sun-woo opened the folder, slid a single printed page across the desk. A photo, a HR intake form from Hanel Fusion, staff photo in the upper corner. The face looked different with the hair pinned back and the exhaustion written openly across it, but it was the same face. Her name on the form is Zara Okoye, Sun-woo said, but her legal name is still Okoye Kang. The divorce was finalized 14 months ago. She never changed it back. Min-jae looked at the photo, didn't touch it. That's not possible, he said. His voice came out steady. It always came out steady. That was the problem. His voice had never once told the truth about what was happening underneath it. There's one more thing. Sun-woo paused, which he almost never did. She's pregnant, Director, visibly. Based on timing, don't. It's consistent with, I said don't. Min-jae stood, turned to the window. Seoul spread out below him in long rivers of light, ordered and indifferent. He put one hand against the glass. The cold of it moved up his arm. Leave the folder. Sun-woo left. Min-jae stood at the window for a long time. He wasn't thinking about the acquisition report. He wasn't thinking about the board meeting in the morning, or the call he'd missed from his mother, or the contract clause his legal team had flagged at 7 p.m. He was thinking about the way she'd looked at him across that table. Not with hurt, not with rage, with nothing. The deliberate, constructed nothing of a woman who had already decided he wasn't worth the expression. And something about that, more than anything else. It cracked the surface of something he had spent 14 months keeping sealed. He didn't sleep. This story is just getting started. If it's hitting different, like this video, subscribe, and drop a comment below. Let's keep going. She heard the knock at 7:38 in the morning. She knew the time because she'd been awake since 5, sitting at the table with a cup of tea that had gone cold, running numbers in her head that refused to come out right no matter how many times she rearranged them. She wasn't expecting anyone. She never was. She crossed to the door in her socks, one hand resting briefly on the wall for balance the way she'd started doing these last few weeks, and looked through the peephole. Her hand dropped from the wall. She stood there for a full 4 seconds. Then she unlocked the door and opened it. Min-jae stood in the hallway in a dark coat. No assistants, no briefcase. And he was holding 2 paper cups of coffee, one in each hand, with the slightly stiff posture of a man who had rehearsed this and already knew it wasn't going to go the way he'd planned. His eyes went straight to her stomach. He didn't look away, didn't pretend, just looked. And something in his face moved the way ice moves when the temperature underneath it changes. Not breaking, just shifting. Zara said nothing. She leaned against the doorframe and waited. "I brought coffee," he said. Then immediately, "You probably can't have coffee. I can have 1 cup." He held one out. She took it, didn't step back to let him in. He looked at her face. "How long have you known? That I was pregnant, or that you'd walk back into my life uninvited?" "Zara." 5 months, she said. "Sunyo, I found out a month after the divorce was finalized." His jaw tightened. He looked at her stomach again, and then back at her face, and the question was right there. She could see it sitting behind his eyes, blunt and unavoidable. "It's she said flatly before he could ask it. "Not that you have any right to that answer right now, but yes." Something left his body, a kind of tension she hadn't realized he'd been holding until it was gone. He exhaled slowly. His hand came up as if he might reach toward her, then stopped. "Can I come in?" "Why?" He held her gaze. "Because I owe you more than a hallway." She looked at him for a long moment, not weighing whether she could trust him. That ship had long since sailed and sunk. She was weighing something else. Whether she was strong enough for whatever this conversation was going to cost her. She stepped back. Let him in. The apartment was small. He was too large for it. Not physically, but in the way certain people fill a space without trying, the way their presence rearranges the air in a room. He stood just inside the door and took it in without comment. The table with its stack of papers, the single mug, the crib box in the corner, still sealed in its cardboard packaging, unopened. He looked at the box for a moment too long. Zara sat down at the table, didn't offer him a seat. He took one anyway across from her, setting his coffee down and folding his hands in front of him the way he did when he was thinking through a problem. "Don't do that," she said. "Do what?" "That." She gestured at his hands. "Kinan, you're not in a boardroom." He unfolded his hands, put them flat on the table. "I didn't know it was you." "I know you didn't. At the restaurant, if I had known, you still would have said it." She looked at him steadily. "You would have been kinder about it, but the result would have been the same." He didn't argue. She respected that. Arguing would have been worse. "You were hiding," he said, not accusing, just noting it. "I was surviving. There's a difference. You could have called me when you found out. Could I?" She tilted her head slightly. "What would you have done, Min-jae? 14 months ago, you handed me divorce papers without a single conversation, without one phone call, without even telling me why. You had security escort me out of the building." Her voice didn't rise. God, that was the most devastating thing about it. It stayed completely level. "You tell me, what exactly was I supposed to call you for?" Silence. Outside, the city moved through its mourning. Buses, horns, the distant percussion of a market opening. In here, nothing moved at all. I had reasons, he said finally. I know you think that. They were real. They were wrong. She said it without heat, without performance, like a fact, like gravity. Whatever you were shown, whatever someone told you, you were wrong. And you didn't ask me. You just decided. His throat moved. Zara, I'm not asking you to apologize right now. She pressed her hand flat against her stomach, a gesture so natural she probably didn't know she was doing it. I'm telling you what happened. You left. I found out I was pregnant. I figured it out alone. Oh, I've been figuring it out alone. That's the story. He looked at her hand on her stomach, then at her face. I'm not leaving again, he said. That's not your decision to make. Then whose is it? Mine. She met his eyes. It was always mine. Another silence. This one different. Not empty, but full. The kind of silence that forms around something that has just been said and can't be unsaid. Min-jae picked up his coffee, held it without drinking. What do you need? He said quietly. Zara looked at the stack of papers on the table, at the sealed crib box in the corner. Right now, she said, I need you to not make this harder than it already is. He nodded once. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even a beginning. But it was the first honest thing they'd said to each other in over a year. He came back the next morning. And the morning after that, he didn't announce it, didn't ask permission. He simply appeared at 7:30 with food this time. Rice, soup, the kind of meal that took thought, and set it on the table without ceremony. Zara looked at it, then at him, and said nothing. She sat down and ate. He sat across from her and drank his coffee and didn't try to make it mean more than it was. On the third morning, he brought a folder. She looked at it the way you look at something you already know is going to complicate your life. Hanul called me, he said. Park wants to offer you your position back. Full reinstatement. I didn't ask him to. He said the incident reflected poorly on the restaurant, and he wanted to correct it. I'm not going back there. I told him that. He slid the folder across the table. Which is why I have a different offer. She didn't open it. No. You haven't read it. I don't need to. The answer is no. Zara. His voice was patient, carefully patient, the kind that costs something to maintain. You have 3 weeks of income left based on what I could estimate from. You estimated my finances? Sun Woo pulled together. Kang Min-jae. She said his full name the way you say a sentence that needs to end. You do not get to investigate my life and then present it to me like a problem you've solved. He stopped, took a breath, tried again. I'm not trying to control this. Then what are you trying to do? Fix it. It's not yours to fix. It's my child. The words landed hard. She looked at him across the table. Really looked. He the way she used to before she'd learned to look past him instead. And something moved in her expression. Not softness, more like recognition. The acknowledgement that he was right about that one thing at least, even if it didn't change anything else. She opened the folder. The role was real. Senior client strategy consultant, flexible hours, remote capable, a salary that made her jaw tighten because it was exactly what she needed and he knew it. She read every line twice, then she closed it. I won't work under you, she said. Then don't. He leaned forward slightly. Work with me. Different floor, different reporting line, full autonomy on your accounts. I stay out of your work. You stay out of mine. And when people find out who I am, they'll find out eventually regardless. Better it's on your terms. She looked at the folder. At the bills underneath it. At the sealed crib box still in the corner where it had been for 3 weeks because she hadn't had the energy to open it alone. The baby kicked. Sharp this time. A real kick. The kind that had started recently. Deliberate and insistent, as if the child had developed opinions and intended to share them. She exhaled. My terms, she said, meaning I set my hours, I choose my accounts, and you do not come to my floor unless I invite you. Agreed. And this, she gestured between them, does not become gossip. No announcements, no company-wide emails, nothing. Agreed. This is work, she said firmly. Nothing else. He nodded. Nothing else. She slid the folder back across the table toward him and said, "I'll start Monday." He picked it up, and she noticed, though she didn't comment on it, Amarin, that he looked less like a man who had won something and more like a man who was relieved he hadn't lost. She was good at the work, better than good. By her third day, she had restructured the presentation approach for a struggling account and rewritten the client brief in language that actually reflected what the client wanted rather than what the company wanted to sell them. By the end of the first week, two senior managers had stopped by her desk to introduce themselves, which in this company was the equivalent of a standing ovation. Min-jae didn't come to her floor. He kept his word. But on Friday afternoon, as she was leaving, she passed him in the lobby. He was coming in from an outside meeting, still in his coat, phone in hand. They made eye contact across the marble floor. He gave a single nod. She returned it, and neither stopped walking. In the elevator alone, she let herself breathe. That evening, he knocked. She let him in. It had become a quiet routine, this too, something neither of them had formally agreed to, but neither had stopped. He sat across from her and said, "I need to tell you something." She looked at his face and knew it was serious. Not boardroom serious, something older. "The divorce," he said. "The reason I filed." She was very still. "I was given evidence." He said it carefully, like a man who had rehearsed this and still wasn't sure he'd get through it. "Photographs, financial records, recorded calls, all of it pointed to the same thing, that you had been placed in my life deliberately, that someone had introduced you to me on purpose, to extract information, to access company data." He paused. The evidence was detailed, almost specific. It had names, dates, account numbers. Zara's expression didn't change, but her hands, flat on the table, pressed down harder. "It was fabricated," he said. "All of it. Sunwoo spent 8 months tracing it back. It came from a rival company, the SEO group. They had a contact inside my family's circle who helped build the file." He stopped, looked at her directly. "Someone who was introduced to me through my mother's connections." Silence. "I chose what I could prove," he said quietly, "over what I felt." She looked at him for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and absolutely even. "You chose to not trust me." He said nothing. "Evidence or not," she continued, "whatever they showed you, I was your wife. And you didn't come to me. You didn't ask me. You decided." She shook her head slowly. "That's not about the evidence, Min-jae. That's about what you actually believed I was capable of." He had no answer, because she was right, and they both knew it. The silence that followed wasn't angry. It was the kind that forms when the truth has finally arrived and there's nothing left to argue about. Just the weight of it, settling. If this story is moving you, hit that like button and subscribe. We're heading into the part that will break you wide open. Don't miss it. Monday came, and then Tuesday, and then 2 weeks had passed. And somewhere inside that time, something shifted. Quietly, without announcement. The way seasons change in a city that never slows down enough for you to notice. Zara moved through the office like she had always been there. She had a way of reading a room not by what people said, but by what they stopped saying when she walked in. She used that. She sat in client meetings and waited, and the waiting itself was a strategy, and it worked every time. Min-jae kept his word, stayed off her floor, routed communication through Sunwoo, gave her the autonomy he'd promised. But the building was one building, and the elevator had one lobby, and sometimes there was no avoiding it. On a Wednesday, he passed the glass-walled conference room, and she was inside. Is standing at the head of the table, presenting to 6 clients who had not expected to be impressed and clearly were. She glanced toward the glass, not at him, just habit, and their eyes caught for half a second before she looked back at her clients without missing a beat. He kept walking. Sunwoo appeared at his elbow. The Daejin contract closed. She restructured the final clause herself. They were holding out on licensing terms, and she turned it around in 20 minutes. "I know." Sunwoo said nothing further, but Min-jae caught the slight tilt of his expression, the face of a man carefully not saying something he very much wanted to say. Small things accumulated. A Tuesday morning, they arrived at the elevator at the same time, 14 floors in silence. When the elevator jolted slightly between floors, his hand moved automatically toward her arm and stopped an inch short. They both noticed. Neither mentioned it. A Thursday afternoon, her folders slipped in the lobby. He crossed the distance before he thought about it, crouched down, gathered the papers. Their fingers touched when he handed them back. Not intentionally, just the geometry of it. And she pulled back carefully and said, "Thank you," in her professional voice, and he said, "Of course," in the voice he used when he was trying not to be anything else. He thought about that for the rest of the day. What he knew was this. He had spent 14 months certain he had made the right decision, even when the certainty felt hollow. And even when he woke at 3 in the morning with the unease of a man standing outside a door, he had closed himself. He had told himself it was clean, necessary. He had believed that because the alternative, that he had destroyed something real out of pride disguised as principle, was not something he had been willing to look at directly. He was looking at it now. On a Friday evening, her lights were still on at 7:30 when everyone else had gone. She was at her desk, shoes off, one hand pressed into the small of her back. A document open in front of her that she wasn't reading. Her other hand rested on her stomach, and she was staring at nothing. The specific gaze of someone who has finally run out of things to keep themselves busy with. He knocked on the open door. She looked up. Something moved across her face, brief and unguarded, there and gone before she could arrange it. "You should go home, Al," he said. "I'm finishing something." "You've been staring at the same page for 10 minutes. Were you watching me?" "The glass walls are your floor's design choice." The corner of her mouth moved. Almost. She looked back at her screen. "I'll leave in 20 minutes. He didn't move. She looked up again. "I'd like to walk you out," he said simply. No agenda, just that. She closed the document, reached under the desk for her shoes, put them on with the careful deliberateness of a woman 8 months pregnant who had stopped pretending otherwise, and stood. They rode the elevator down in silence. Outside, he flagged a car. She didn't argue. He opened the door and she got in, and as the car pulled away, she looked at him through the window, just briefly. And there was something in her face he hadn't seen directed at him in a very long time. Not love, not yet. Something smaller and more fragile. The willingness to consider it. He stood on the pavement until the car turned the corner. That night alone she finally broke. Not loudly. She sat on the edge of her bed in the dark and pressed both hands over her face and let it come. The grief of a marriage that ended without a goodbye. The exhaustion of surviving alone. The fear that never fully quieted. And underneath all of it, the things she'd refused to name. She was angry at herself. At the part of her that had felt in that elevator, in that lobby, in those seconds of his hand almost touching her arm. Relief. Is something embarrassingly close to comfort. She pressed her hand flat against her stomach. "You don't get to come back," she whispered. Not to the baby, to herself, to the part of her already softening. "You don't get to come back and fix what you broke." Her voice caught. She let it. "It was never just me anymore. It stopped being just me the moment I saw that scan. And you weren't there." The baby moved, long and slow and steady, like a reminder. She wiped her face, lay down, closed her eyes. She didn't sleep for a long time, but she stayed still. And sometimes she had learned that was enough. If this story is hitting you differently, like this video, subscribe, and drop a comment. We're heading into the part that will break you wide open. He showed up on a Saturday. No food this time, no folder, no carefully constructed reason. He knocked and she opened the door, and he looked past her at the crib box still sitting in the corner. Same position, same untouched cardboard, and said, "Can I put that together?" She looked at him. "You don't know how. I'll figure it out." She stepped aside. He pulled the box into the center of the room, crouched down, and opened it. 47 pieces. An instruction sheet printed in 4 languages, all of them somehow unhelpful. He laid the parts out in a row and studied them with the focused expression of a man who had navigated board mergers and international contracts and was not going to be defeated by flat-pack furniture. He was absolutely being defeated by flat-pack furniture. 20 minutes in, he had assembled what appeared to be one side rail attached to a cross support that was definitely facing the wrong direction. He turned it again, checked the instructions, turned it a third time. The dowel goes in first, Zara said from the couch. She had a book open in her lap that she wasn't reading. He looked up. Which dowel? The short one. They're all short. The shorter one. He found it, tried it, it fit. He looked at her with an expression that was almost sheepish. Not an expression she had ever seen on his face before. And she looked back down at her book before he could see that she was trying not to smile. He worked quietly for another 30 minutes. She brought him water without being asked and set it on the floor beside him and went back to the couch. At some point, she stopped pretending to read and just watched. He had taken off his jacket, rolled up his sleeves. He was fully on the floor now, holding two pieces together while reading the instructions with the focused intensity of someone who had decided this was going to work regardless of what physics had to say about it. Left side first, she said. I know. You're doing the right side. He stopped, looked at the piece in his hands, put it down, picked up the other one. She pulled her knees up and rested her chin on them and watched him work. Their hands met at one point, both reaching for the same support beam at the same moment. Neither pulled back immediately. His fingers stayed close to hers for 2-3 seconds before he shifted his grip and continued without comment. And she let the moment pass, the way she let a lot of things pass these days. Not ignoring it, just not making it larger than it needed to be yet. When the crib was finished, he stood and looked at it. Slightly imperfect. One side sat a fraction higher than the other, but it was standing. Solid. He pressed down on the rails and it didn't move. It works, he said. It does, she agreed. He picked up his jacket. She walked him to the door. He paused in the doorway and looked back at the crib. White wood against the pale wall. Small and real and ready. Something crossed his face that he didn't hide quickly enough. Get some sleep, he said quietly. You too, she said. She closed the door and stood with her back against it. Then she went and stood in front of the crib and put her hands on the rail and held on. 3 days later, Madame Han-serin arrived. Zara opened the door and for a moment neither of them spoke. Min-jae's mother was a composed woman. He always had been. But the composure was sitting differently today, like something had loosened underneath it. She was holding a small gift bag. She held it out. Zara took it, stepped back, let her in. They sat across from each other at the small table, and for a moment the only sound was the city outside, indifferent and continuous. I made things harder than they needed to be, Madame Han said. Not as a preamble, just that, placed quietly between them. Zara looked at her. The people who built the file against you, I introduced them into our circle, not knowingly, but I introduced them. She held Zara's gaze without flinching. My pride about the marriage made me careless about who I kept close. I wanted it to end. And someone used that. A pause. I am not asking you to forgive me. I am telling you that I know what I contributed to, and that it was wrong. Zara was quiet. She looked at the gift bag. Inside, wrapped in tissue, was a small blanket. Ivory hand-stitched at the edges. The kind of thing that took time. I'm not ready to forgive you, Zara said. I want to be honest about that. I know. But I heard you. She set the blanket on the table. And I'll remember that you came. Madame Han nodded once. She looked at the blanket and then at Zara's stomach, and something moved in her expression. The quiet reckoning of a woman who understood, perhaps for the first time, what she had nearly cost everyone in this room. She left without staying long. That was the right choice, and she seemed to know it. When the call came at 2:17 in the morning, 11 days later. Min-jae was awake. He had been sleeping badly for weeks, and he answered before the second ring. Zara's voice was calm, which somehow made his heart rate spike faster than if she'd been panicking. It's time, she said. I'm coming. You don't have to. Zara. Low. Certain. I'm coming. He was there in 19 minutes. The hospital room was bright and cold and full of the controlled urgency of medical staff who had done this 1,000 times. Zara was already in the bed, working through contractions with the focused inward concentration of a woman who had been preparing for hard things for a very long time. He walked in, and she looked at him and didn't speak. He crossed to the chair beside the bed and reached for her hand. She let him take it. For hours it was just that. Her working through the pain, him staying present. No instructions, no problem solving, no attempt to manage or fix. Just his hand around hers and his voice, when she needed it, low and steady. "You're doing it," he said once, quietly. Not encouragement. Something simpler. Just a witness. She tightened her grip and didn't respond, and that was enough. When the baby came, it was just after 6 in the morning. The light outside had turned the pale gold of early Seoul dawn, and the room went briefly, completely silent before the cry came. Small and furious, and absolutely certain of itself. The nurse placed the baby in Zara's arms. Min-jae stood. He looked at his child, and something inside him came completely undone. Not gradually. All at once. Like a structure that had been holding tension far too long and had finally fully let go. His eyes filled. He didn't stop it. Zara looked up at him, exhausted in a way that went beyond tired, deep and cellular. And still she looked at him openly, taking him in. He sat back down, put his elbows on the edge of the bed, pressed his face into his hands for a moment, then looked up. "You did this," he said. His voice was barely holding. "Without me. You did all of this without me." She looked down at the baby, then back at him. "I know," she said softly. "I won't miss anything again." He stopped, cleared his throat. "I won't." She reached out with her free hand and placed it briefly against the side of his face. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. We are almost at the ending, and it's going to stay with you. Subscribe if you haven't, like this video, and drop a comment. What's one word for how you're feeling right now? The weeks after the birth moved differently. Slower in some places, faster in others. The way time behaves when something has permanently reorganized your life, and you're still learning the new shape of it. Zara named her Nia. It meant purpose. She hadn't told Min-jae she was considering it, and when she said it aloud in the hospital, quietly, almost to herself, he had looked at the baby and then at her, and nodded once. Slowly, like a man receiving something he knew he didn't deserve but was grateful for anyway. He came every day, not with folders or offers or carefully constructed reasons. Just himself, arriving in the early evening, staying a few hours, learning the rhythms of a newborn with the same focused intensity he brought to everything except softer. He learned which position settled Nia when she was fussy, where that she slept better with low sound than silence, that she had her mother's habit of going completely still when something new entered the room, taking it in, deciding about it, before reacting. Zara watched him learn these things and said nothing. She filed them away carefully the way she filed everything. She was not ready to trust him, but she was no longer certain she was as far from it as she had been. One evening, 6 weeks after Nia was born, he arrived to find Zara asleep on the couch. Nia was in the crib, also asleep. He stood in the center of the apartment and looked at them both. The room was dim and warm. The ivory blanket hung over the side of the crib. A half-drunk cup of tea sat on the table. Nia's tiny socks were on the floor beside the couch, removed and abandoned mid-evening. He picked up the socks, folded them, set them on the table. Then he sat in the chair across from the couch and waited. When Zara opened her eyes, she found him sitting in the low light, not on his phone, not reviewing anything, just present. She lay still for a moment, looking at him, looking at the room, and something settled in her chest that she didn't immediately try to name. "How long have you been here?" she said. "About an hour. You could have woken me. You needed the sleep." Nia stirred in the crib. A small sound, then quiet again. They both waited. She settled. Zara reached for her tea, found it cold, set it back down. Min-jae got up without being asked, went to the kitchen, put the kettle on. She watched him open the right cabinet for mugs, find the tea on the second shelf without searching, and understood that he had been paying attention to this space for months. Learning it, quietly without making a thing of it. He brought her tea and sat back down. They were quiet together, not the tense quiet of the early weeks, the quiet of two people who had stopped pretending the distance wasn't closing. "I keep thinking about what you said," he started, "that I chose not to trust you." He held his mug in both hands. "I told myself for a long time it was about the evidence, that any reasonable person, shown what I was shown, would have done the same." He paused. But that's not honest. A man who truly trusted his wife would have gone to her first. The evidence wouldn't have been enough if I had been certain of you. She was very still. And I was certain of you, he said quietly. Yeah, that's the part I couldn't look at. I was certain, and I still chose the easier thing. Because letting someone matter that much, trusting them completely, terrified me more than losing it did. He looked up. I chose proof over you because I was afraid, not because I believed it. The room was completely quiet. Nia made a soft sound, settled again. Zara looked at him for a long time, at the lines of his face, which she knew as well as any place she had ever lived, at his hands around the mug, at the man he had been and the man he was becoming, and the distance between those two things, real, measurable, paid for in ways that could not be refunded. I'm not ready, she said. He nodded immediately. No argument, no push. But I'm close, she said. He looked at her, really looked, and she held his gaze and let him see what was there. Not everything, but enough. I can wait, he said. I know. She looked down at her tea. That's part of why I'm close. The wedding was small, a Saturday in late spring, clean air and soft light, the city in one of its rare generous moods. 12 guests in a garden venue in Mapo. No orchestra, no event planner, no receiving line. Just people they loved in a space that was manageable and real. Zara wore ivory. Her hair was down. She had not fussed over herself beyond what made her feel like herself, which was the only preparation she had ever believed in. Min-jae stood at the end of the garden path in a dark suit, no tie, and watched her walk toward him with the expression of a man who understood, fully and without reservation, that he was looking at the most important thing that had ever moved in his direction. She reached him. He took her hands. Neither spoke for a moment, just stood in the light with their hands together, the way they had once stood in a hospital corridor learning the weight of what they were choosing to carry forward. The officiant spoke. They repeated words. The words were fine. The words were not the point. Then Nia, in the arms of Madame Han in the front row, decided she had been quiet long enough. The sound she made was somewhere between a complaint and a declaration, loud, sudden, fully committed, and the entire garden erupted in laughter. Real laughter, uncontrolled, the kind that undoes a room completely. Zara turned and looked at her daughter. Nia's face indignant, her tiny fist raised as if lodging a formal objection with the proceedings, and laughed. Not a polite laugh, not a composed one, a real laugh, open and full. The laugh of a woman who had been through the worst of something and had arrived intact at the other side of it. Min-jae watched her laugh. His expression was not complicated. It was the simplest thing he had worn in years. He leaned forward and kissed her once, quietly, before the officiant had finished. And she let him, still smiling, one hand pressed briefly against his chest before she pulled back and gave the garden a look that said she knew exactly what she was doing. Nia continued to object. Everyone continued to laugh. The light held. Later that evening, after the guests had gone and Nia was asleep and the apartment was quiet in the good way, the full, settled quiet of a day that had given everything it had, Zara sat on the couch and Min-jae sat beside her, and they didn't speak for a long time. Outside, Seoul moved through its night. Somewhere a train, somewhere a river. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He adjusted slightly so she was more comfortable. They stayed like that as the city turned around them. Two people who had broken something real and come back to it changed, who had paid for their mistakes in the currency of time and loss and the loneliness of being wrong about something that mattered, and who had chosen, despite all of it, to try again. Not the same. Something harder to build than same. Something better. The voiceover settled soft over the last image. Not announcing, just arriving. The way the truest things do. Love didn't return the same. It returned better. Because this time, they both knew what it cost, and they chose it anyway. Fade to black. That's the end. And if this story moved you, please like this video, leave a comment telling me your favorite moment, and subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. Thank you for watching all the way through. See you in the next one.